The night of October 14th, 1975, 19-year-old James Salamites, with five of his friends in the car, was driving in Hartford, Connecticut around 10 in the evening. Came to an intersection and the light was green, so he proceeded through, but he was shocked. As another car came barreling into the intersection and unable to stop, he struck it hard in the side. As the cars came to a stop, he recognized the passenger in the car that he had just hit. It was Gerald Ford, President of the United States. It is history that deserves to be remembered. On October 15th, 1975, reporter Ann Compton gave a harrowing account on the ABC Evening News. As the limousine went through a red light at 35 miles an hour, suddenly around the blind corner came a yellow Buick. Agents with guns drawn swarmed over the heavy limousine, anxious to pull it away from whatever danger may be packed inside the yellow car. 1975 was a chaotic year in American history, and there was reason to be concerned that this was more than a mere accident. Just a month earlier, there had been two attempts on the president's life. One of those as the president was about to enter the same custom 1972 Lincoln Continental State car that had just been struck by the Buick. The Lincoln itself was a reminder of the risk. Armor had first been added to the presidential state car, a 1936 Ford V8 coupe nicknamed the Sunshine Special, in 1942, following the attack on Pearl Harbor. But the state car had received a significant upgrade following the November 1963 assassination of President Kennedy. The 1972 Lincoln Continental limousine was the first to be designed and built by the manufacturer for maximum protection. All previous presidential state cars had been armored after the fact. Delivered in 1974, the 22-foot, six-passenger car was armored all around, including bulletproof glass, and weighed a whopping 13,000 pounds. That weight was even more impressive given that the car had to travel with the president, carried by a massive Air Force Lockheed C-141 Starlifter, burning a mind-boggling 1,800 gallons of jet fuel per hour of flight. In October 1974, Ford was facing a difficult primary battle with former California Governor Ronald Reagan. Time magazine wrote at the time, the president acts as if he is running scared, an odd posture for an incumbent. Ford had not lightened his schedule despite the September assassination attempts. Ford had come to Connecticut, the New York Times reported, to give the Republicans a lift in their fundraising efforts and pursue this week-old drive to get Congress to approve tax and spending cuts. Time reported that more than 2,000 Republicans had gathered at the Civic Center to dine with the president. Given the events of September, the Secret Service was not taking any chances. The New York Times wrote that dozens of Secret Service agents, state troopers, and city policemen covered Bradley International Airport, the 15-minute motorcade route into town, the Civic Center, and high vantage points in some of the buildings around it to give the president a heavy blanket of protection. After the president spoke, his motorcade left for Bradley International Airport. It was nearly 10 in the evening. The Times reported that the street on which the motorcade was traveling, Talcott Street, is a narrow one-way street that crosses a series of major thoroughfares. Robert Hager of NBC News reported that last night's presidential motorcade had to travel only 5 city blocks from the Civic Center where the president spoke to an interstate highway leading to the airport. Time magazine wrote, leaving Hartford's Civic Center, where Gerald Ford had just addressed a GOP fundraising dinner, a presidential motorcade of 7 cars headed fast for Bradley International Airport. The procession was led by 4 Connecticut state police cruisers, none sounding sirens or flashing emergency lights. But the motorcade became stretched out, lead cars too far ahead to protect the president from oncoming traffic. Hartford Police Lieutenant Thomas Grant Jr. told the Times there had been a substantial gap between the lead cars in the motorcade and the president's car. It probably should have been closed up. It would seem to be an easy task to ensure the route. Hager noted that the Hartford Police Department had more than 100 policemen assigned to presidential security. 100 policemen. 5 intersections. But it wasn't enough. While the first 2 intersections, Trumbull and Main Streets, were blocked, Hartford Police spokesman Gary Damon told the Times that when you have limited resources, they can only go so far. Apparently, so far was only 2 blocks, because 1 block further is when the game of red light, green light went wrong. Time magazine reported the light was red, but driver Andrew Hutch, a Secret Service agent, went through. He assumed that, as always, local police had sealed off the intersection, but no cop was at the corner. Seeing a green light, James Salamites, 19, proceeded to cross the intersection from a side street at about 30 miles per hour. Salamites' 1968 yellow Buick LeSabre smashed the presidential limousine on the right front fender, forcing it 6 feet off course. Why had police not blocked the intersection? Damon told the Times that the place where the cars collided was beyond the periphery of our resources. Still, wasn't the motorcade accompanied by motorcycles? Time reported motorcycle policemen were supposed to block side streets, to teams leapfrogging each other from block to block, but by the time the motorcade passed a narrow street, the police officers had left. James Salamites, 19, barreled through the intersection on a green light in a Buick sedan and crashed into the president's limousine. Police spokesman told NBC News, "Our information is that one cycle blocked the intersection for a very short time and then moved on. 2 cycles should have dropped off and blocked this intersection." In the car was Frederick K. Beeble Jr., the Republican state chairman. He told NBC, "I think the president caught it out of the corner of his eye and knew that it was about to happen because he tried to embrace me and put his hand on my knee, and I think he said, 'Be careful,' and that's when the impact took place." The president's warning made a difference. Time wrote that Andrew Hutch, the Secret Service driver, swerved sharply left, the maneuver blunting the impact of the collision, but Ford was still knocked to the floor. Beeble said the impact knocked the president to the floor, and I went over on top of him, and in the process of landing on top of him, somehow I broke my hand. Beeble's was the only injury. The president was unhurt, although Time reported one eyewitness later reported the president looked scared. I'd have been scared too. The driver of the Buick, which had simply driven through a green light, was in for a shock. Beeble told the Fairfield County Hour in 2008, after the crash, the driver's side window of his car and the president's window were close, and they were almost eye to eye. "I saw the expression on that young man's face when he saw who he'd hit. He had this astonished look." Salamites recalled, "I looked at the other car, and looking at me is President Ford. I recognized him right away, and I just couldn't believe it." But the Secret Service could not know yet the nature of the threat. Time reported that when Ford's car halted with a dented right front fender, Secret Service agents with guns drawn surrounded the Buick and hauled out its shaken driver. The Hour reported Salamites' car had just rammed the presidential limousine, and for the first few minutes, the scene turned very tense. Salamites had read all the accounts of Secret Service agents with guns drawn, but says he remembers none of that. Instead, his memory is focused on Gerald Ford, staring at him through the windows of the limo and the badly damaged Buick. While damaged and unable to go full speed for fear that the dented right fender might damage the tire, the limousine drove off. Police estimated the car was only stopped for a few seconds. The Times reported that Mr. Hutch stopped the limousine for a half minute and drove off at a high speed. At the airport, the president said merely, "These things happen." The Times reported the president moved up the steps into Air Force One swiftly and easily and arrived at Andrews Air Force Base at 11:15. But what had been merely a fender bender for the president was a nightmare for the young 19-year-old Salamites. The Washington Post wrote, "Everything began to go wrong for James Salamites the night he left home to perform a simple good deed, pick up his brother from work." First, there was the Secret Service. The Washington Post reported in 1977, Salamites says he was interrogated at great length at a police station as if he had done something wrong. Time reported that he was released after a few hours, and Hartford police said he was not to blame for the accident. But despite the fact that it was the other guy who ran the red light, Salamite's life was forever changed. ABC's John Chancellor said on the Evening News, "The president wasn't hurt, the Lincoln slightly damaged, but the Buick took a real beating. Its 19-year-old driver was released, presumably, to explain it all to his parents." And despite the accident not being his fault, there was explaining to do. Hagar said on the Evening News, "Police are holding Salamite's wrecked car. Inside are 5 empty beer bottles and 2 empty beer cans." The police seemed unconcerned, telling NBC he had a couple of beers, but a lot of kids had a couple of beers. It seemed an unnecessary embarrassment, given that the police agreed that he had done nothing wrong. And the press wasn't always helpful. He told the Washington Post, "Then came any number of newspaper accounts of the accident that made it seem as if it was my fault, such as a Connecticut man who slammed his car into President Ford's limousine." Salamites was then overwhelmed with attention. The Post wrote, "Obscure one minute and famous the next, Salamites at first thought he might like the attention, the request for interviews and television appearances, but soon he felt more seared than celebrated, confirming his initial suspicion that getting in the way of a president boded no good." He had some opportunities, including going on a show with Howard Cosell, but he was embarrassed when Cosell mentioned the beer cans. He was invited on What's My Line, which also didn't go well. The Post notes that he was identified by all the panelists. He said it was too close to the accident, and my picture had been in the paper. The show netted him little. He told the Hour, "I had to pay my own bus fare there and back. There were some little prizes, but no money, and I had to come home the same night." A car show the next year was also a failure. The Post wrote, "At an auto show appearance in Hartford, he signed autographs, but upon reflection decided that he'd made a fool of myself on stage." Unperturbed, Ford called him personally. Salamites told the Post, "He told me I acted very good on TV, that I handled the situation very well." But the Post notes he recalls not having much to say to the president. "I was too nervous. I never talked to a president before." He moved and took a job in New Jersey, but made the news again when he was arrested for alleged possession of marijuana. He denied the charge, which was dropped, but it was unwanted publicity. He told the Post, "When I was arrested, it was front page. When the charges were dropped, it was placed just under the marriage intentions." He made the news again when his arm was broken in an accident aboard a tugboat where he was working, the press coming to the hospital where he was recovering. In 1977, the 21-year-old told the Post, "I don't want to be known anymore. The accident didn't help me. It did more harm than good. It caused me a lot of anguish. I've lost friends. My parents have lost friends, mainly because of the accident and the drug charge. We're looked down upon. We're not the envy of the street." At the time, he'd given up driving, while the Buick, he said, was in my driveway, rotting. The accident was apparently unique. Ford's press secretary, Ron Nissen, noted at the time that the Secret Service was unable to find another example of an accident involving the presidential limousine with the president inside. There had been some small things, bumping a police officer on his motorcycle, and even one time when they hit a bike, but nothing like, he said, hitting another car. The Hartford Police Department accepted responsibility, although Time noted that, in fact, it was the Secret Service's responsibility ultimately to protect the safety of the president. But what is perhaps most striking about this accident was the impact that it had on a young man. A brief turn, a small moment in history for us turned out to be, well, life-changing for him. Isn't that how history goes? Still, by 2008, the Hour reported that at the age of 51, he was a good sport, talking about the accident decades earlier. He even added, "Ford was a good president. I liked him." I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of The History Guy, and if you did, please feel free to like and subscribe and share The History Guy with your friends. And if you also believe that history deserves to be remembered, then you can support The History Guy as a member on YouTube, a supporter on our community at Locals, or as a patron on Patreon. You can also check out our great merchandise shop or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo.